from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. Today is the 51st day since the Islamist terror groups from the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip launched an onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,400, mostly civilians, wounding some 4,800 others, and kidnapping over 245 elderly, children, women, infants. As we continue to update you from here in Jerusalem, I'd like to take this opportunity and to say thank you. Thank you to all of you who have not remained silent during Israel's time of need, who have reminded Israel that by saying regularly, never again, is not just a mere slogan. For all the Brits who went out to the streets today, some 80,000, and have declared that they're standing fast in support of Israel. To all the Americans who've done the same throughout the great states of the United States. To our brothers and sisters throughout Africa who have not necessarily taken the stance of their governments, but have stood up for truth. And to all of you in Asia as well, Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific, of course, we hear you, we see that you stand by us, and we truly appreciate every word of encouragement, and by saying whatever you say to your leaders, that they may know that Israel is not standing alone. As we right now will like to return to updating you on the latest, let's turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, what can you tell us?
So 51 days, as you noted, this is the entire length of Operation Protective Edge back in 2014. And here we are nowhere near the end of this conflict, however it unfolds. Now, the hostage release deal seems to be on track. And after yesterday, Saturday, was an eventful day with several hitches caused by Hamas, actually with no reason except to position and posture the organization to show that it can either make trouble or decide to forgo it. Today, it seemed to be much smoother, with Israel getting 14 of its own nationals, one of whom is a dual national with a Russian passport, and 3 foreign workers. And in order for our viewers around the world to understand the emotional impact, one should go back to the first week of this war, when the pain and grief over the 1,400 killed, murdered, was paramount. But then slowly, the families of the hostages took center stage, and the names of their loved ones in captivity became household names. And the entire country followed the fate of babies, small children, teenagers, women, elderly people, and all the rest. And therefore, everyone is cheering each time it is certain that those batches are in Israel, are being escorted by IDF pilots in helicopters, or soldiers in vehicles, get to the hospital, meet their families. There is a national sigh of relief. This is supposed to go on tomorrow too, and will probably be extended. But the military commanders are already approving the plans for the second or next stage of the campaign. And in the northern front, Defense Minister Gallant visited today, and apparently Israel has separated the Golan Heights front from the Lebanon one, gave the Golan Heights front to another Major General, David Zini, under whom there is at least one division. And Gallant said in front of them that their forces killed more than 100 Hezbollah personnel and pushed Hezbollah back from the front. So this too is a marker, because in the north, the front could flame up again. and it will be from a new starting point, not the one which Hezbollah on October the 8th, a day after the massacre, started from.
Thank you, Mr. Owen. I think it's important to highlight, of course, that every hostage being released is also a reminder of the evil that Israel is fighting against. That is something that should remain also center stage and should not relent in any circumstance, considering the fact that unless this evil is eradicated, it would signify both a victory for the Islamic Republic of Iran, first and foremost, and secondly, it would also challenge Israel's capacity to once again grant its citizens or residents of the southern part of the country along the Palestinian enclave quite a challenge. They would not want to return to an environment that is threatened by a murderous terrorist organization. Let's also immediately turn now to an undisclosed location where we're joined by the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense, Brigadier General in Reserve Danan. Thank you for joining us, General. I'd like to ask you particularly, what is your perspective right now, since there are preparatory planners and commanders sitting together, going over the plans for the next stage following this number of days of so-called humanitarian pause and preparing themselves for the next stage, as Mr. Owen put it.
Exactly, and allow me following your words, Jonathan, regarding the Hamas. The humanitarian pause that we see now and return of our hostages, it is not because the Hamas became a humanitarian organization and he cares about his own people, or for sure on our people. This is exactly because of the pressure that is being enforced on him by the IDF during the last few weeks. And he, being in such a pressure, he understood that he needs this pause probably much more than we needed. And the only reason that we have this pause is because what we've did in the last few weeks. And so I think it is important to say that the IDF is continuously talking about the next step. We don't see this pause as a ceasefire. This is a pause, and the IDF commander, which issue kind of a letter to the soldiers of the IDF. This is the third time that he does it during this war. Was discussing exactly this. Was saying that we would continue until the win. We all have to remember the two main goals of this war. One of them is the destruction of the Hamas, his infrastructure, and him being the ruler of the Gaza Strip, and the other one is bringing back the hostages. And we are going to continue on those two main goals. And this was emphasized by him today. And also Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu that visited himself the Gaza Strip today. This is exactly what we've heard to him. So I think that in general, we could say that although we have this pause, Israel as a nation, the cabinet, the IDF, is everyone is talking about the next step. We are not going to resume this fight, and we are going to continue.
Thank you, General Kavish. Let's turn now also to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by a retired Brigadier General, Mark Kimmett, who is a former Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs. Thank you for joining us, General. I'd like to hear your perspective on the latest vis-a-vis the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip. Particularly, where does the United States at this stage stand with the latest developments and the pause at hand, of course?
Yeah, I think right now, all that is playing on the TVs is the hostage release. That's the main story. Live on CNN, Fox News, all the stations of record. But I also believe there's a sense here in the United States among the general population that this pause will be extended far longer than the IDF may wish, and that somehow this notion of going back to open warfare, at least in the minds of the majority of Americans right now seems inconceivable. I think that there is a view that these twin goals of getting the hostages back and destroying Hamas are irreconcilable, and that at this point, now that the hostage situation is starting to ease up, that somehow Hamas will drip the hostages back so that the humanitarian pause becomes more of a ceasefire for weeks, if not months, than simply a temporary pause for the purposes of returning hostages and then a return to conflict.
Thank you, General Kimmett. Mr. Olin, I'd like to hear your perspective on this at the one hand, and the second, could you also provide more of an elaborate overview of the northern arena? You heard, of course, or you noted Defense Minister Yoav Gallant's remarks regarding the north, but also there was a reported airstrike on Syria, which quite frankly occurred during the day rather than overnight, something that usually is not quite common. But where are the things standing at this stage?
Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, the retired general, former CENTCOM commander, called up Yoav Gallant, his Israeli counterpart, the Minister of Defense, and the readout that the Pentagon issued emphasized what Israel should not do, according to Austin, if the fighting resumes. For instance, Israel should deconflict its moves with international organizations, NGOs, and others. Israel should not impede any humanitarian efforts, and so on and so forth, making life very difficult for the Israeli military planner, because obviously the Hamas leadership will take advantage of these restrictions. And, Israel has much more capability than has been noted up to now, especially in the anti-tunnel part of the campaign, simply because of the fear that hostages are also being kept in the tunnels. So in that regard, the IDF cannot use its full power against the enemy. Now, as for the north, the Syrian strike may or may not have had anything to do with the current crisis. Israel has been striking Iranian or Iranian proxy targets in Syria and on the Syrian-Iraqi border for a long time. And it is quite important for Israel and for the Israeli Air Force to show that they are not too burdened to stop striking during this time.
From another perspective, of course, it also indicates that Iran continues unrelenting to try and smuggle weaponry from Iraq into Syria, through Syria, also to its proxy in Lebanon, namely Hezbollah, and is also preparing the northern front continuously for a wide-scale conflict with Israel, that is. And let's turn then also to another theater, and that is the Red Sea, namely also Israel's most southern city of Eilat, which has been subject once more in the last 24 hours to a number of projectiles being fired in that direction. General Gavish, could you confirm that and provide us some details?
Well, yes, we could say that there was interception made by F-35, Israeli F-35. There was an unmanned UAV, an unmanned vehicle that was flying toward Israel, and it was intercepted by our Air Force. So we see that the Red Sea is still active, we could say. And by the way, that we had also yesterday in the north something like this. Although we see that the amount of let's say of the amount of where the Hezbollah is trying to shoot, or the amount of rockets, UAVs, and anti-tanks units are very low. in the last 2 days, but still we saw interception made by the Iron Dome for an unmanned vehicle that was flying over there. And the other thing that I think it is super important to mention, and this is following what was mentioned by Amir, is that the Israeli Air Force, we have to remember, is looking toward the north. We don't take any chance with Hezbollah. We are not going to be surprised again. There is Israeli pilots who are looking toward this direction in a very, very short notice. There are hundreds of thousands of Israeli reservists who are deployed in this arena. So if something would decrease or if something would be inflected in this arena, the IDF is ready for it.
Thank you, General Gavish. General Kimmett, I'd like to hear your perspective, since there has been a lowering of friction, if I may call it that way, during the time of the pause, also in Iraq and Syria, between Iranian proxies and U.S. forces stationed there. During the time of the pause, however, this time, despite the American demands to try and lengthen it as much as possible, it is prone to miscalculation. It is prone to reignite at any given moment, and that is something that obviously is taken into account by all parties involved. But also, if I may expand and ask you to elaborate on the hijacking of yet another vessel in the waterways, namely near the Bab el-Mandeb, by the Houthis, namely in collaboration with the Islamic Republic of Iran. It seems like the Iranians are not willing to stop their activities of malign behavior throughout the shipping routes, which lead to Israel particularly.
Yeah, let me start with the Iraq piece. It is true that in Iraq right now, the PMFs, whether it was a document published by supposedly Kataib Hezbollah, which was then overridden by another document that said this speaks for all of the PMFs, they seem to be abiding along with the truce inside of Gaza. They consider that to be part of that same truce. So I believe that if Israel goes back to war inside of Gaza against Hamas, you will see a corresponding uptick in activity inside of Iraq. They seem to be somewhat synchronized, perhaps not in the mind of Hamas, but certainly in the mind of the Muqawama, the resistance movement inside of Iraq. As regards the Bab el-Mandab and the activities of the Houthis, it really is odd because, number one, they certainly should understand that those are not Israeli vessels out there. And number two, I don't know what their end state is unless this is Iran's way of just kind of poking the bear from 5 or 6 different directions to demonstrate to the region that they may take a truce inside of Gaza, they may take a truce inside of Iraq, but they haven't taken a truce elsewhere. And so they, through the Houthis, seem to be suggesting that these are all independent actors, but I think we all understand that they are all cat's paws for Iran.
I think it's important to
and
highlight,
by the
I
way,
may, Mr. Oren,
as
one
General
moment.
Kimmett fully knows, the first overseas adventure, one may say, campaign of the U.S. Armed Forces was in the early 19th century in Tripoli, Libya, the shores of Tripoli, as the Marines say. And the Houthis may see another generation of Marines if they keep up their shenanigans.
Now, that's certainly the case. In fact, I think it would not just be the Americans that would support a coalition to keep the Bab el-Mandab and the Indian Ocean open, but as we've done inside the Persian Gulf and inside off the shore of Somalia, any interference with international commerce will see an international response.
Indeed. Thank you, Mr. Oren and General Kimmett, for these remarks. I think it's important to clarify for our viewers the fact that indeed between 1795 to 1845 or 1850, there was a period in which the northern African states, namely the Berber states, the Kingdom of Morocco and three Berber states under Tripoli, with direct influence of Turkey, which at the time was the Ottoman Empire, of course, launched quite the raids of piracy against any vessels that were not under the protection of the British Crown or France, for that matter, since these two navies were too powerful for them to contend with. Nonetheless, the United States, which had a relative weak navy at the time and could not immediately accumulate the resources in order to secure the maritime shipping, fell prey to those North African Islamists. They were Islamists back then. They remain Islamists today. And according to all accounts, there were roughly 1.5 white individuals from Europe, from the United States, who were captured, taken into slavery if the host countries of those nations did not or were not willing to barter for their lives by paying quite the large amounts of ransom in order to free those vessels, something that drew, as you mentioned, Mr. Oren, the United States into war, bombing Tripoli and conducting additional raids in collaboration with other European nations. And then the second point that I'd like to highlight is what General Kimmett mentioned about PMF. It's important to highlight to all of you at home, PMF, in reference to the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, namely Hashd al-Shabi in Arabic, some 67 separate armed militant groups, terror groups. Some of them are designated, roughly 47 of which, 47, are under the sway both of financing and directing by the Islamic Republic of Iran, which basically utilizes them for the interests of Iran. Nevertheless, they are also sponsored by the Baghdad central government, which is all the time within that equation of between the rock and the hard place. On the one hand, they have the Iranians to contend with. On the other hand, they're fearful of losing the backing of the United States. So it's quite a challenging reality. But let's turn to Mr. Oren once more and ask, with regard to the maritime shipping, what is Israel doing about that?
Israel is planning. Israel is keeping its powder dry, except for defense, as we heard, its F-35s, its surface-to-air missiles. They are all quite ready to defend Eilat and the entire Negev, the entire southern half of Israel, from those missiles coming from 1,500 or 2,000 miles away, kilometers away. But obviously, once the conflict with the Palestinians in Gaza and perhaps with Hezbollah in Lebanon is over for the time being, the Israelis will teach the Houthis a lesson. This will not go unanswered. There is a tradition in Israel. It's grounded in doctrine. Even after 1991, when Saddam Hussein lobbed missiles at Israel, and Israel, for diplomatic reasons, in order to have the coalition stay together, did not react immediately, but then after the war planned to assassinate Saddam. So this plan did not go ahead as hoped for, but nevertheless, Israel does not leave such an attack unanswered.
General Gavriel, I'd like to ask you about preparedness, as it seems like the southern threats are not diminishing anytime soon. What can be done beyond the boundaries of what has already been implemented?
Well, we are fully deployed for it, Jonathan, and we are not looking only to the south. We have to remember that we have Iraq in the east, and of course Iran. So the preparedness is almost 360 degrees for sure when it comes to the air and missile defense and the multi-tier defense that is vastly deployed here in Israel. We also have to remember that the United States have some relevant assets here in Israel if something with the, let's say, inflate in a regional scenario. So this is something that is continuously being prepared inside Israel, but also within the boundaries of the discussions between Israel and the United States. So this is that we are fully looking at. But the other thing that I think maybe is important to mention is and if you were talking about preparedness, is about the southern flank, which is in the Gaza Strip. This pause is also used by the IDF to prepare itself, to prepare the next stage, to prepare the plans for the soldiers to go over the next stages and to make sure that everyone is coordinated. And we take this time to restart it in an even stronger way and much more coordinated, looking at the lesson learned up to now. So this pause is also used to prepare the IDF for the next steps.
General Kimmett, to what degree is the American administration right now under President Joe Biden resolute about the need to end fighting and actually pursuing a lasting ceasefire, irrespective of reaching the objectives which Israel has set and America has endorsed in the offset of the 7th of October massacre?
Yeah, I don't see the administration coming off that position right now. There would have to be a significant change in what's happening on the ground, either on the side of Hamas or on the side of the IDF. It would appear to me that the administration has found a comfortable space where they can operate in support of Israel through material means, but also express some sort of humanitarian concern about the citizens of Gaza. On the other hand, I think that is what they believe to be at this point the golden mean, not necessarily for military purposes, but for diplomatic purposes, and more importantly, for internal public support of the United States people.
Thank you, General.
If I may just add to what General Kimmett just said regarding the domestic political side. The other day, former President Trump and the future probable nominee of the Republican Party for another run chided Biden for not being able to get any American hostage released. Actually, there were 2 Americans earlier in the conflict released. So today, a child, Abigail Idan, a 4-year-old, was released, was in the 3rd batch. And President Biden immediately took to the podium, cut short his vacation, his Thanksgiving weekend, in order to announce it. So obviously, while this is a minor issue compared to all the other social and economical and political items on the presidential politicking agenda, nevertheless, there is an aspect here, especially within the Democratic Party, but also between the Democrats and the Republicans.
Thank you, Mr. Oren. Well, this is all the time that we have for today, so I'd like to thank General Kimmett, General Gavish, and Mr. Oren for taking out of your times to update us on the latest. And I'd like to thank all of you at home once again. Until our next update from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.